Welcome to the Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the Hoosier Left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers. I'm recording from Bloomington, and this is a special exclusive interview with Democratic gubernatorial nominee Jennifer McCormick's pick to be her running mate this November, former 10-term state rep and Indiana state director for USDA Rural Development, Terry Goodin. Indiana is unusual in that party delegates choose the candidates for lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, auditor, and treasurer at their respective party conventions, not primary voters. This can lead to awkward situations like Republicans find themselves in this year, where delegates selected Christian nationalist extremist pastor Micah Beckwith as their lieutenant governor nominee over Mike Braun's chosen running mate, State Rep. Juliet Wire. Democrats may very well find themselves in a similar situation. When McCormick, herself a former Republican, announced the conservative Democrat Terry Goodin as her choice, many Indiana Democrats, particularly the left flank of the party, were incensed. In 2011, Goodin voted against gay marriage in the Hoosier State. He regularly voted in favor of restricting abortion rights and once carried an A-plus rating from the NRA. And now I'll read from Indianapolis City Councilman Jesse Brown's latest newsletter. Quote, "These were not a few isolated bad votes either. Goodin repeatedly and frequently supported more prisons and police, co-sponsored a Jim Lucas bill to reduce criminal penalties for guns in schools, co-authored a bill to remove Indiana from a greenhouse gas reduction plan, co-authored a bill to expand the uses of the death penalty, co-authored a bill to have more guns in our schools, co-authored another bill to protect people who bring guns to schools, co-authored a bill to make it easier to bet on horse racing, co-authored yet another bill to make it easier to bring guns to schools, and co-authored a bill to make it easier to bring guns into casinos." Despite all of these extremely right-wing positions, Goodin lost his House seat back in 2020, 46% to 54% to a Republican. This is a prediction of what I fear will happen in November. Democrats can't enthusiastically support these positions and thus stay home. Republicans would prefer real Republicans to a Republican light and didn't vote across party lines to support Goodin. End quote. This, I think, pretty well sums up the concerns of the Hoosier Left. Where is the balance on the ticket? Can two white, rural, conservative-ish candidates get folks in Indianapolis, the region, Fort Wayne, and Evansville revved up enough to overcome GOP voter suppression? Brown continues, quote, "Centrist candidates will not excite the base, will not drive volunteers, and will not drive turnout. Some former Republican voters may indeed decide they cannot vote for Trump and his allies this time around, but there is no indication from polling or any other source that a sufficient number of these voters will change their affiliation and vote. It's the young people, the activists, and the progressives who make up the core of Democrats' campaign managers, campaign staff, volunteer leaders, volunteers, and social media supporters. Those people are indicating as loudly and clearly as they can that a Goodin ticket is not one they can enthusiastically support." End quote. So, as an Indiana leftist, and someone who shares these worries with Jesse, I wanted to hear from Terry Goodin himself. I wanted to give him a chance to speak directly to the concerns of the Hoosier Left. So, my dear friend D. Owens connected me with Terry, and he was kind enough to give me a full hour, and I'm sharing that conversation with all of you, especially delegates to the State Democratic Party Convention, so you have all the information you need before voting on Saturday, July 13th. Now, I won't give my whole pitch to subscribe to Who's Left since this is a special episode, but do please consider a paid subscription over at scottaaronrogers.substack.com to help me keep this community growing. For $5 a month or $50 a year, you can help me push our state in a better direction, and maybe if we can reach critical mass, I can put down my tool belt and devote my full time to you, to this project, and to Indiana's future. So, if you have the means, pause right now, go to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. And while the best way to help this project is a financial contribution, if you can't afford it at this time, you can still help. Subscribe at the free level over on Substack. Set your favorite podcast player to auto-download new episodes of the show. Rate and review the show on whatever platform you use. Follow me on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at Who's Left, or on Instagram, Threads, and Twitter at ScottRog78. That is SCOTTROG78. And on Mastodon at ScottRog78 at Hoosier.social. To those who have joined this community already, especially those paid subscribers, thank you so much. I am truly honored and humbled, and to everyone, thanks for listening. Now here's my interview with Democratic Lieutenant Governor candidate Terry Goodin. Terry Goodin, welcome. Thank you for joining the Who's Left podcast. I appreciate it.
Hey, Scott, it's good to be here.
So, first of all, I really want to thank you for doing this. I know there are a lot of people, particularly on the left flank of the party, where I come from, I'm a lefty, who are not particularly happy with Dr. McCormick's selection of you as her preferred running mate for lieutenant governor in the fall. So I'd like to give you an opportunity here tonight, especially to talk to them, to talk to the left flank of the party, and sort of explain yourself, explain your evolution, and why you are the best pick for lieutenant governor this fall.
All right, sounds good. I'm up to that, and I'm thrilled to be here because as an educator, I'm a lifelong learner, and I push that amongst everyone. And I think after we get through with the dialogue tonight, everyone will understand where I was and where I'm at. And I tell you what, Scott, there was a whole lot of Hoosiers where Terry Goodin was back in 2011, who are now where Terry Goodin is now in 2024.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about that a little bit. One of the most striking comments I think I got when talking to some of the delegates was, that they say this guy's been wrong on women's rights, on LGBTQ rights, and on gun control. Is he even a Democrat? And look, it's a big tent. So first, start off by telling those people, why are you a Democrat?
I'm a generational Democrat as well, not just a Democrat. My family's been Democrats since there's been political parties probably in the United States. But, really, it's kind of funny because that is one of the things people say, well, he's just he's a Democrat or Republican in sheep's clothing or whatever. I'm like, that really makes no sense to me at all, because if I'm really a Republican and I'm in Indiana, I would just be a Republican. It'd be a whole lot easier.
You said that. It's certainly true.
A whole lot easier. So no, I'm a dyed in the blue Democrat. My whole family's Democrats. I don't even know if there's any R's on our side, but anywhere. But So anyone who would question that just needs to go back to my record in the legislature with Democrat objectives, and also go back and just simply check my voting record. I mean, ever since I've been able to vote, I've voted Democrat. So pretty easy choice for me. And besides, my grandmother and grandfather on both sides would roll over in their grave if they knew that I was anything other than a Democrat. So our Democrat family, Scott, is, in my grandmother and grandfather's living room, there was a picture of Jesus. And then also next to that was a picture of Franklin Roosevelt. So that tells you how deep the roots go in the Goodin household for Democrats.
Yeah. Would you consider yourself like an FDR Democrat?
I consider my favorite president's Lyndon Johnson. And I think Lyndon Johnson portrays a lot of what a lot of older style Democrats were. They had some beliefs that weren't right, but they grew and they realized they were wrong, and they changed their mind and they made the right decision as they moved on. So those are the kind of people you want to associate with, because if you get into people who are just ground in nothing but no, this is right, and by golly, if you don't believe me and you're not listening to what I say, then you're wrong, and I'm never going to talk to you again. Those aren't the kind of folks that move on and are able to move mountains, you know. So I'm one of those. And Lyndon Johnson, what a great president. There was, as the old saying goes, there was we were in war, but still yet the economy and everything going at the home front was going smooth. Bad foreign policy decisions, but it wasn't just by him; it was by the entire era. That entire era of World War II folks that came out of that. So, but probably somewhere in between Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson, you'll find Terry Goodin.
So, especially, I guess, with the current generation of Democrats, a lot of us, I think, are social Democrats first, and we look at the social issues, like women's rights,
right,
LGBTQ rights, and so on. So, what is it? If you've differed from the party mainstream on those issues in the past, what about the Democratic Party platform has kept you in?
Well, I think all of those issues. I mean, the Democrat Party fights for everyone, and as you move through the process, and especially us spending 20 years in the legislature, that just reaffirmed my commitment to the Democrat Party, because the Democrat Party was the ones in there fighting for workers' rights and for families, great education, a social safety net for those folks sometimes who have trouble. So it's pretty simple to ask me why I'm a Democrat, because I believe in Democrat principles. So as we move forward, there's been a whole host of bills or legislation that Terry Goodin, as a Democrat, might have voted for in the past, that Barack Obama voted for the same way. So there's a lot of folks who have past votes that come up, but what I always like to say is your past is not always your present. And what you want to do is, as I said before, as an educator, I want folks to be lifelong learners. And if the McCormick Goodin ticket is going to win this election this fall, we've got to have a lot of folks to be able to come over to our side and vote for us, because there's simply, unfortunately, not enough Democrats in Indiana just to be able to get the base vote and win. So we've got to figure out a way to appeal to some of those moderates and some of those independents. If we can appeal to those independents and those moderates, and we can win this election. And I'll tell you what, man, the numbers are looking great. We're getting all kinds of feedback from a variety of sources, and all the information coming back to us, Scott, is absolutely amazing. McCormick Goodin is going to win this race this fall.
Okay, let's zoom in on some of those maybe more controversial votes that you've taken in the past, and maybe revisit those and talk about maybe where things have changed and where things have stayed the same with you. In 2011, you voted against same-sex marriage while a member of the Indiana legislature. You have since said that you regret that vote. Can you talk about your evolution? Like, one of the criticisms I hear is, this is just a political expediency. He's the same guy he always was. He's just saying that now because he wants to win.
It's odd. I, along with, I think, probably 41 other Democrats voted that way, or a large majority of them. So as we moved along, I think what happened is, and I can't tell you, Scott, that one morning I woke up on February the 18th and poof, I was all of a sudden said, oh my God, that was wrong. I just changed and evolved over time. And I think probably the biggest part of that is, as I said in my talk there with Jennifer when she announced me, is the fact that I didn't realize at the time that I was dehumanizing and hurting people. But what I did was I finally realized, hey, no, these are people. This is not an activist group. This is not a group that wants special privileges or whatever. This is a group of people. And when you start breaking down people and you start getting to the individual level, I look back and said, oh my God, I was wrong. I was totally wrong. And, really just to be able to stand up in front of those folks and admit that. And, I had my two young sons with me at that announcement for a specific reason. I've got an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old, Scott, and quite frankly, they don't even know what lieutenant governor is. All they were worried about was whether we were going to stop at the grocery store and buy baseball cards on the way back home, you know. But I took them there for a reason, and the reason is I wanted to show them that as you grow older and you do things in life, if you make a mistake, it's okay to admit that mistake and stand up and take responsibility for that and move forward. And I think that day was a huge turning point, not just in a lot of folks politically who follow me, and also who are big Democrats who had that same philosophy, 18, 13 years ago, whenever. I think that's going to allow a lot of other folks to be brave and step up and move forward as well.
Were there individuals that you've come across in your journey that maybe helped you with that evolution, that you saw, they were able to explain and say, yeah, hey, maybe you should, rethink this?
Yeah, so, I'm one of those folks that I like to listen. I like to listen to people's stories. I like to listen to who they are, and I like for them to explain to me who they are. And I get wrapped up in that as well, Scott. I tell who I am, and as I expanded my base of people being connected to or coming into contact with, I realized that, hey, there's a lot of diverse people in this nation, and everybody don't have to think the same way. And if you don't think the same way, that doesn't mean you're wrong. So it's an evolution, like I said, as we move forward. Like I said, I'm going to mention this a lot tonight, Scott. I'm a lifelong learner. And there may be issues as we move forward that in the past we've all voted on, or we all thought was the right thing to do, but we could come to find out, hindsight's 20/20. And if we all had that hindsight, we'd never make mistakes. But guess what? I'm a human. I made a mistake. I voted the wrong way.
Are other folks out in rural Indiana, you think, making the same evolution? They're with you?
I think they are, and I think what me coming out and saying what I did the other day, I've had a lot of folks around who have reached out to me, and they have been saying, "Hey, Terry, I'm just like you. I'm the same way too. I didn't realize we were hurting people. I didn't realize that we were dehumanizing people. It wasn't brought to the forefront at that time with all the major blitz that was going on and all the money spent on marketing by the other side." To ultimately just to try to win elections, and shame on them to hurt people to win elections. But as we move forward, there's a lot of folks out there, Scott, as I said before, that used to think like Terry Goodin used to think, that now think like Terry Goodin does today.
Okay, well, another one of those the big issues is women's rights, and you, while in office, were noted as an anti-abortion Democrat. There aren't a whole lot of those left.
Well, I wasn't necessarily anti-abortion. I was considered pro-life at that time, but it wasn't anti-abortion. I was never. Hey, there's never going to be any abortions whatsoever. So, as we work through that as well, my record on that's pretty spotty. And we had counsel with folks on our side and our caucus, females. And one thing about it is I think helped me along the way and helped me transition into where I'm at today was the fact that I always took counsel in folks when issues came up that didn't necessarily affect me personally. So I would ask the ladies or my close confidants, hey, what's going on with this? What do you think? And they always said, you know what, Terry, we want you to vote with us, but just remember the Roe versus Wade's there. There's a safety net to catch us. Well, we're in a completely different universe now, Scott. So really, to talk about what was then and now talk about now, it's almost like you can't even do that. You can't even compare it, because now that safety net's gone. We all know that the Dobbs decision was a complete and total attack on women's rights. It was a very partisan act, and it's an act to try to control women and the actions that they can take and their freedoms. And really, if people don't understand the real intent of the Republican Party, then they need to wake up, because the biggest dog whistle I saw, and it was brought by my wife, showed to me was after Joe Biden's State of the Union address, they had that lady senator sitting at a kitchen table talking about family values and all that. I'm like, jeepers creepers. And my wife looked and said, yeah, she's barefoot and pregnant too. So which is an old saying we have in Southern Indiana. So, hey, listen, women, these folks are not your friends. If they didn't see that and didn't recognize that, then man alive, I don't know what we can do to wake some of those folks up. And really, Scott, the beauty of this is the fact that my long career in the legislature has always been, it's a real travesty that we don't pay women the same as we do men in our state.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been on record and been noted that we should have equal pay for equal work. It makes no sense why we do not do that, and why for years I tried to get that passed through the legislature and try to get that to become law. And there's just a lot of inequities. And we talk about these ladies and the attacks on their rights. Hey, ladies, they're not going to stop at abortion or women's health care, or whatever how you want to phrase that. They're not going to stop there. They're going to go after birth control next. They've already started attacking IVF and in vitro fertilization. They're going after the very things that science has come out with to help people have children and to have families. And that's just wrong, Scott. I don't care how you look at it. And I don't care on their side of whatever angle they're looking at. That's just wrong.
Yeah. My understanding is that the Indiana Democratic Party platform does not currently include a women's rights stance. Would you advocate for one?
Absolutely. I think women's rights are very important. And as I said before in the legislature, hey, we've got to treat everybody equal and fair. There should be no difference in the genders, folks. I mean, that makes no sense. And if you really look at it, if you talk about work and pay, at the end of the day, if you're looking at single families, most of the time the children are with the mother, and the mother then also has to pay child care and all of that out of her paycheck. So to begin with, she's not getting paid as much. Then she has those expenses that she has to pay out of that smaller check. How's that fair, Scott? That's not fair at all.
And God forbid she have a child that has any, medical complications. And, our FSSA is horribly run in our state under Republican administration.
It is
losing $1 billion, like where to put it?
Well, and I've been on record immensely about FSSA in the past and the way it's operated, and there's just some real issues there, and I think we can do better. I really do.
So how would, let's say Dr. McCormick and you win in November and Republicans keep the Senate. How would you use your position as lieutenant governor, as president of the Senate, to maybe control some of the Republicans' worst impulses? How would you use that to put a stake in the ground for women and LGBT folks in this state?
Yeah, Scott, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that, because when my 20 years of experience in the legislature, working in the House, working across the aisle, half of that time was spent probably in the majority, the other half was spent in the minority. So you got to learn how to work with the other side. And then you got to figure out, okay, where's common ground? Where's this all pan out? And where does it become fair for everyone? So I will take that experience with me. I've worked with a lot of those folks that are in the Senate, passing bills back and forth between the two chambers. So I think I have an end to be able to sit down and talk with the Republican leadership, and say, hey, listen, you're going in the wrong direction. This is not right. And the beauty of this is this, Scott. What we will have now is with Jennifer being in the governor's office and me being in the Senate and having a podium there, we will have somewhat what's called the bully pulpit, as you know what I'm talking about as a news person. So we will have that bully pulpit. So right now, Hoosiers only get one side of the story, because the entire system's controlled by one party. So all they hear is just their side of the story. But when we get in the position and Jennifer's governor and I'm going to be the leader of the Senate, then they will hear both sides. If there's bad legislation coming through, they're not just going to hear the side that's going to win. They're going to hear both sides, and Hoosiers will be able to make an objective decision on what they need to do and what they think is right. So that's going to be the huge part of this. We're going to be able to stand up for everyday working Hoosiers, and Hoosiers that go to work every day, raise their families, work hard, work on the farms, get up early to milk the cows. Those folks are going to have a voice again in the State House in Indiana, Scott, when they elect McCormick Goodin in 2024.
What legislative tools does the lieutenant governor have at their disposal in the Senate to
Really,
sort of gum up the works there?
yeah. So really, there's not a lot of tools. I mean, the only time we're able to vote is if there's a tie, as you know. It's somewhat like in Congress. So really, what we can do is that we can influence because uh, if if there's legislation going through, then we have the press, we have the media, we have folks like you to be able to get that word out, which they don't have now. So we'll be able to let folks know what's going on at the state house instead of it almost like being under wraps. It's almost that we laugh about it, but it's almost with the Tweety Bird cartoons where Tweety Bird's cage is hanging there and there's this cover over it. You can't see inside the cage. Well, that's what it is at the state house right now. There's this cage and they've got a cover over it. You can't see what's going on in there until after it's all over with. And when they pull the cover off and they walk out saying, "Okay, session's over," it's too late to do anything. We'll have that voice, Scott, to be able to say, "Wait a minute, let's put the brakes on here. This is not good for Hoosiers."
Another thing that I don't think is super great for Hoosiers that we don't have any democratic ability to override bad decisions by the legislature or maybe put forward constitutional amendments like some of our friends in Ohio or Kansas or, very red places do have the ability through like citizens initiatives and referenda to influence the debate in their state house. Should Indiana have such a ballot measure or referendum, something like that?
Yeah, Scott, that is one unfortunate side of Indiana is we're not a referendum state. So whatever goes on in the state house and whatever legislation is passed, that is law. But I'm one of those folks that I think the more information and the more activity and the more participation you can get from individuals trying to create policy and law is better than a few. So I would think that 6 million Hoosiers being able to take advantage of working on a referendum and trying to make things work in Indiana is probably better than 150 legislators. So I definitely would support a referendum operation to be able to go into our Constitution and be a part of our state policy as we move forward. And quite frankly, those folks who would be opposed to that really are opposed to open government and fair and equal government.
Yeah, speaking of open and fair and equal, our legislative districts are not drawn fairly or equally. How do we overcome the gerrymandering problem? Because Indiana is not a red state. We are a rigged state. We have had our lines drawn in such a way that it's nearly impossible to vote some of these Republicans out of office. How do you and Dr. McCormick suggest we go fixing?
Yeah, so as we work through that, Scott, we've got to let people know how the elections work. I think most people are they're busy going to work. They're putting food on the table. They're buying tennis shoes for their kids to play soccer in or baseball or whatever, and they don't really pay attention to what's happening maybe at the state house. And today, with less and less media coverage, it becomes even more difficult for folks to try to keep up. But what we got to let folks know is the way these districts are set up is everybody's not running an equal race, because what I always like to use as an example, if you're at a track meet, and what these legislative race or districts, the way they're set up is if somebody's running a 400 meter, it's like somebody else gets to start at the 300 mark and then take off while the other person starts at the regular starting line. So they're not fair. I think if we really need to put together a commission, and I advocated for that as a representative and voted and tried to push that to have a commission to put together fair and equal representation throughout the state of Indiana. You're right, Scott. We're not necessarily a blood red state like the numbers show in our state house representation at all. I mean, if we get 40-some% of the vote, almost 50% of the vote, then that's probably about how many representatives you should have in the legislature. If there's 100, and that's what we have. So, and then that way, when we show that they're pushing bad legislation and they're making bad decisions, you can win those 5, 6, 7, or 8 seats that put you in the majority, and that's what we used to be able to do.
I remember those days when Democrats actually were able to have a majority in the state house. That we got some good stuff done.
Absolutely. And, really,
You were there for some of that.
I was, and I'm proud of that. And I want to let folks know that we work very hard for education because we all know that, education is the largest rung on the socioeconomic ladder. And whether that education looks like a college degree, a postgraduate degree, or whether it's certifications and extra training and a job that you really love doing, just that extra education helps you make more money. So what we want to try to figure out is how do we continue to offer opportunities for folks in the educational arena so they can train up, skill up in the jobs, and they can earn more money instead of trying to put together programs and projects that take us back to the 1980s and trying to train them and prepare them for mediocre manufacturing jobs that won't locate in any other state, but they find friendly ground in Indiana.
One of the concerns that some of the delegates I've spoken to, especially in the education field, is that you were co-author of a bill with Jim Lucas from Seymour down there to make it easier to bring guns into schools.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you finished there. Yeah. So what we were doing there is when I joined the NRA back in 2000 and whenever it was before. I mean, the NRA was an educational group. That's what they did. Eddie Eagle. I don't know if you ever remember that or not, but Eddie Eagle was a part of that, and they came in. They taught gun safety to children at school. They have turned the faucet off, and they've completely turned right way radical. They're nuts in a lot of places. There, the leaders there just aren't right. So as we move forward, and as an educator, well, what we try to do is, and as a legislator, what you try to do is you try to leverage yourself to get in a position where you can help decide what that looks like at the end. So what, as you know, it's like when you make sausage, when you put it in the grinder and wait for it to come out the other end, it don't always look the same. So there was always a strategy, and there was always Democrats on certain bills. As you notice, as you go through and look at that, there was always Democrats on certain bills. You think, well, why in the world would they do that? Well, as a co-author, you have say in what happens to that bill. So that's why I was on that bill and a lot of other bills. I mean, I always encouraged, when I was the minority leader, I encouraged Democrats to go on bad bills because that's the only way you're going to get them changed. They've got the majority, so if you don't go on there and you just rail against it, guess what? It's going to go up there and they're going to outvote us 53-47 every time. What are you going to do? Mm-hmm. So get on that bill, make a difference in it, and make it at least palatable. You may have to put salt and pepper on it to be able to taste it, but at the end of the day, it may be livable. Whereas if you don't try to participate in it, it's not even, it's ridiculous. It just goes over.
So it's more of you'd say that your participation in those bills like that is more to just like do your best to sand off some of the roughest edges.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, if you look, what we did was we had folks, whatever they brought to the table and expertise there on our caucus, we would ask them to jump on bills like that because we wanted them to be able, like you said, I love that analogy, kind of sand off the rough edges. And sometimes you just couldn't do it. It just couldn't happen. So, but what you did was at least you was able to have a voice. And my grandfather always told me, and I've heard this before, but if you don't have a seat at the table, that means you're probably on the menu. So, that's why I always try to encourage those folks, jump in there. And it's all about strategy. It's all about chess, man. When you work in the legislature. Well, I think really what I'm able to provide as we go into the next legislative session and being there in the Senate is I'm able to provide the opportunities and be able to work with our Democrat senators because I've got that experience and I've played that game of chess for 20 years in the House of Representatives. So I've got that ability to come over in the Senate and try to help the Democrats there. And we've got great leaders in the Democrats there in the Senate. So those folks are right on it. They're wonderful. Always amazed by their dedication and how hard they work and fight for Hoosiers.
I understand you had a pretty good conversation with Senator Ford when he decided not to challenge you for this nomination.
Yeah, I love JD. We get along, and we're all on the same page. We're all on the same team, and it's kind of like a family argument. You get in a argument with your brother or sister, but you know what? 2 weeks later, you show back up at Mother's Day picnic, and you both brought something for everybody to eat, right? So you sit down at the table, and then you share that apple pie or that, in my case, derby pie is what I like. But you share that derby pie, And that's good. There's nothing wrong with disagreement in certain areas. I think the worst part about disagreement is when you don't sit down and work out the difference. That's when it becomes a problem. So,
Yeah.
so what we did is, hey, there was concerns. They sat down with Terry Goodin, and Terry Goodin, I've always been open. I always want to tell folks what's on my mind. We sat down, we worked through the problems, and I think everybody's very comfortable to be able to support Terry Goodin as we move forward. And I know JD is very much so. And like I said, he's a rock star in the Democrat Party, and I look for great things from him in the future.
Yeah. I do want to turn back to guns there. We were talking about just a little bit ago. You just discussed your displeasure with the turn the NRA has taken. Are you still a member?
I still am a member, but I'm not an active member. I'm a life member, so it's kind of went defunct. I don't participate in any of their goals or anything like that at all. So I do like to get their magazine so I can keep up with what the enemy's doing and what they're saying, what's going on. So that's kind of, I want to make sure I keep getting that so I know how to fight back when the time comes to be able to fight back. So, and I think those folks that don't like to see maybe the other side's dogma or whatever, just try to figure out how to work against it, then they may support Micah Beckwith because he's the guy that wants to ban books, So I'm about learning. I'm all about literature, and it's one of those deals where if you read it and then after you read it, people who are well informed usually make a better decision, and so I want folks to be well informed, and I want that information to be accurate. I want it to be true, and as we move forward, that's what helps folks make the right decisions. And right now, the Democrat Party's had some tough elections in the last couple of years, but we've not really been given any information, Scott. The general public hasn't been given any information to figure out, hey, well, what we're doing must be okay. Well, it's not. You don't know what the other side is. You don't know what the other parts of the issue is because they're not telling you. So I think it's all about education and all about trying to expand our knowledge and trying to figure out ways to make our state a better place to live, work, and raise a family.
So you're not active in the NRA anymore. You still a gun owner?
Absolutely. I do own guns. And if you live in rural Indiana, you'll know why you own guns. A lot of critters out there. And, I raise beef cattle on the family farm. And there's nothing a little more edgy than being down in the back of the pasture when you're, and you're along the edge of a creek and all of a sudden 2 coyotes come out on you like, hey, what are you doing here, man? So you always got to have that for safety. And, as you work through that, I think there's some common sense ways to make the Second Amendment work in our nation. Right now, it's just completely out of balance because the kooks are in charge. But there's a way to make that safe. And as we move forward, you can support the Second Amendment and still believe that, hey, not everybody should own a gun.
Yeah, so you support background checks.
Absolutely. Common sense
flag laws. Yeah.
Yeah, common sense legislation because, I've got a twin brother. A lot of folks don't know that until they see us or see me or him somewhere, and we tell them.
Am I really talking to Terry right now?
You are. I promise that. So my twin brother actually, he was the public information officer for the Indiana State Police for 20-some years, and so he was on, he was on TV and radio a lot, and people got to trust him. And now he's the sheriff of Scott County, and you know who I've talked to when police issues come about? I call my twin brother, man, and all his friends, because they're police officers, and I got other friends that are police officers. So I always want to make sure that I'm informed on decisions and what's been going on also. It's kind of like, Scott, this is not a necessarily good analogy, but it's kind of like feeding their beast that they have, their money beast. That money beast always has to have red meat, man, to make it churn, So they're always digging deeper and farther. They can't ever stop at common sense. They always have to go that much further because the people that's supporting them, that's paying them money to run for office or do whatever, is demanding that. So what we've got to do is we've got to get back to that common sense, and we've got to let them quit feeding that beast as we move forward, because Hoosiers are the ones that hurt from that. That's who hurts from it.
You mentioned your Lieutenant Governor opponent, Mr. Braun's running mate, Micah Beckwith. Now, in a 2018 Politico article, you yourself were described as a Bible pounding, aisle running Pentecostal.
Yeah.
Mr. Beckwith is a charismatic Pentecostal preacher. How are you two different?
Yeah. So I'm one of those Bible pounding Pentecostal fellows that believe in individual rights and personal freedoms, that people have the right to make their own decisions about what they do in their life and whether they go forward or backward or sideways or crossways. So he's exactly the opposite. He thinks that government should be able to tell people what to do, and then the church should be able to tell people what to do. And if you don't do that, then, hey, we're going to chop your finger off. Now, I say that rhetorically, but you don't understand where I'm coming. So there's a lot of difference in those types of churches. As we know, there's a gazillion different denominations of churches. And it's quite funny because, my Pentecostal preacher, I've never ever heard him talk about politics from the pulpit. So I don't, maybe I've been immune to that, where people try to bring politics into the church, but my pastor's never done that. So I'm not familiar with that, other than what people have told me or showed me on YouTube or other internet stations. So
Beckwith is a self-described Christian nationalist, which I understand means to indicate that he thinks his particular strain of Christianity should be the law of the land.
right.
Do you think the United States of America is a Christian nation?
You know what? The United States of America is a nation that you can believe whatever you want to believe, and that really what. So I mean, I don't. I want to get off of the other fellow. I don't want to drag him through the mud or whatever, but really, it sounds like they're kind of lazy, man. If they don't want to get out and do the work that they're supposed to be doing, and they're trying to rely on government to do the work for them, that don't make sense at all. So that's not how government works. As a matter of fact, we all know that our Savior Jesus Christ steered away from government and the Roman government and all that while he was on earth. So to be able to want to force or intertwine government and religion, I don't know where they get that doctrine. I don't know where they get that dogma to want to do that, other than the fact that it sounds like they're being lazy and they want somebody else to do their job for them.
If you come to your belief under the force of arms, can it even be sincere?
Right. Right. I mean, exactly. I mean, really at the end of the day, God gives us the ability to make our own decisions, even whether we worship him or not. So how can they feel like that government should be able to tell you what you can and can't do in a situation like that? It makes no sense to me at all, Scott. And like I said, I don't know where that dogma comes from, because it doesn't come from any of the religious upbringing that I've ever had. And my grandfather was a preacher as well. And, my grandfather always said, and I'm not pointing this toward anyone, other than the fact that this is something that I've really tried to live by. And he said, Terry, you always want to be aware. He said, you want to make sure that you listen and you follow those folks who wear their religion in their heart and not on their sleeve. So I think as I move forward in life, that's really how I've operated. And I think that's probably, I love my grandfather to no end. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but he was a very wise man. And that statement will stick with me until the day I die.
Yeah, I think that Jesus guy said something about, watching out for people who pray in public.
Right. Yeah. That's what I'm saying, Scott. I just don't understand where all that comes from. And I don't, I don't get the philosophy that people want to use to try to say that you should do that. No, you shouldn't. There is a distinct separation, between church and state, and it was done for a reason. That's why the Pilgrims came here. They need to go back and take history and read their history books again. So as we move forward,
if they're still allowed to, right?
Well, yeah, it depends on what version they'll let them have, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but as we move forward, there's going to be a lot of issues that we talk about. Really. As I've traveled around the state, Scott, I've spoken to a lot of folks with my job with USDA, especially going into smaller towns. And what folks really want is they just want a chance to get a good job, to raise their family so their kids can have a better future than what they've had. So, that's what it's all about. And as we move forward, really this race, and you'd say Terry Goodin and Jennifer McCormick, we're all about saying that, hey, Indiana's better days are ahead of her, not behind her. So really the choice in this election is between Jennifer McCormick and Terry Goodin, who are friends of the future and want to make sure that Indiana is prepared to be able to tackle that future and score a touchdown, versus those people who are scared of the future and want to live in the past and want to stay in the backfield. So there's no comparison in choices between the two camps here, Scott, as we move forward.
Before we, move on toward the end here, I did want to hit on just a couple more issues where maybe you've been more conservative than the rest of the Democratic Party. On the environment, you were party to a bill that would have removed Indiana from the Midwest greenhouse gas reduction pact. Can you explain that?
No, I cannot, Scott. I'm not familiar with that piece of legislation, and I don't want to misrepresent anything by saying something on here that I'd have to go back and look at that. And when I went back and looked at that, then the reason why I did or did not support something would pop up probably. So,
okay. Let's in general talk about your positions on environment.
We have one Earth. We've got to protect it. As a farmer, there are no bigger environmentalists than farmers, and I understand that if I mistreat my farm, if I mistreat the ground, the earth, it's not going to produce. So we've got to make sure that we take care of our earth. We've got to make sure we take care of our environment if we want just to have the simple basics of life, and that's called food. So as we move forward, the environment's got to be a critical issue, and those folks who are climate deniers and all of that, that's just too bad. I just don't understand where that comes from. I mean, there's solid knowledge, scientific, bipartisan, non-political information and knowledge that shows that there's real issues going on with our environment, and if we don't do something to stop it, it's going to be catastrophic for our world.
You're a cattle farmer. That is a very carbon emitting industry. Is it not?
Well, not necessarily, because what we do is we pride ourselves in trying to reach carbon neutrality on our farm. And so what we do is all of the waste and everything that comes out of our farm, we reuse that on the farm for fertilizer or some other type of product. So what we do, though, is we grow grass to help mitigate that carbon footprint. So we grow Bermuda grass in southern Indiana, which is almost unheard of. But so that grass absorbs that carbon out of the air and also the other harmful nutrients as we move forward. And that's one of those things that I'm glad you mentioned that, because we're proud of what we do on our farm, Scott, and trying to make sure that we're protecting the environment. So I'd love to be able to sit down at some point and talk about that for a whole hour, like we're doing here, because I think it would warrant that kind of a conversation. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but I think really what we really need to be aware of is those forever chemicals, the PFAS. We've got to figure out what's going on, and we've got to stop that, because if we continue to allow large corporations and polluters to pollute our earth, that's destroying the earth. That just destroys the ability for people to be able to live and function on earth. So as we move forward, we've got to start talking about those issues, Scott. And I'm going to tell you right now, Indiana's environmental laws are terrible, terrible. Now, here's the perfect example of that. You remember the train wreck that happened in Ohio 2 years ago, I think it was, where they had those terrible chemicals that were burning, and they had to evacuate because the chemicals would kill people and all that. You know where they shipped those chemicals to after that on the cleanup? They shipped those to Indiana, to an Indiana landfill. Now, come on. Tell me that our environmental laws are where they need to be? No, they're not. They're awful. They need to be revamped, and we've got to move our state forward. We don't need to be the dumping grounds for all of the Midwestern states around us.
Damn straight. Last issue I wanted to get into was the death penalty. You have supported expanded use of the death penalty. You still approve of that punishment?
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer in giving the judicial system and a separation of checks and balances, and I think that's the responsibility of those folks to be able to dole out the punishment that they think is necessary for the crime that was committed. We pass those policies, and they follow through with those, but we've got a judicial system that really is world class. I mean, it's world class. We've got the right people in the right positions in most of Indiana. I'm sure there's some folks that say we don't, but we've got we've got folks that can make the right decisions and move forward. So I don't want to tap dance into that judicial branch, Scott, and because I'm not familiar with what they're in everyday docket or what their everyday jobs are. But I'll tell you this, as we move forward and if we do talk about something like that, I'm going to have those folks at the table and I'm going to sit down and talk to them about it. So I think that definitely warrants discussion as we move forward, if that's where the Hoosier people want to lead us.
Okay. Yeah, I know Governor Holcomb has just recently procured some lethal injection drugs and intends to start doing that again. I know a lot of states can't get those because the manufacturers don't want them sold for that purpose.
Right. You know, you're right. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, I don't have enough information to be able to make an informed discussion on that, Scott. I apologize, but I think that's but you're finding out who Terry Goodin is. I'm not going to make a rash statement or a knee-jerk reaction to something. I want to make sure that I get the information. I want to study it to make sure that I'm making that right decision and that right choice. So I think your question there is very good in figuring out, hey, who is Terry Goodin and how's he going to operate?
I appreciate you being able to say, I don't know, because far too many people in your line of work will say a lot of words without actually saying anything when presented with a question like that.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Scott. And I'm just a regular person, man. I grew up in a poor community, and I was fortunate enough to have great parents who had good jobs, and I'm just a regular Joe. You know, I think you may have read somewhere where, hey, if you went throughout and you said, hey, what is a Hoosier? If you would go through and you'd pluck Terry Goodin out, you'd probably say, now that's a Hoosier. That fellow there's a Hoosier, or that gal or whoever. That's what a Hoosier is. So I'm pretty generic, pretty vanilla, pretty bland. Unfortunately, for some of those folks who want me to be some other thing, you know what? I'm not. I'm just, I like to consider myself to be, steady at the wheel and be able to make informed decisions. And most importantly, make informed decisions that's going to be beneficial to Hoosiers as we move forward.
You said about like, hey, I'm a stereotypical Hoosier, right? I'm a rural guy. That may be the popular perception of us, but like 2/3 of Hoosiers live in cities or the suburbs, right? And I think the general reason for the discontent on the left with your selection is, hey, here's a couple maybe more conservative than the center of the Democratic Party, white, rural folks. How are we going to excite the folks in South Bend, Gary, Ammon, Indianapolis, Evansville, Fort Wayne to come out? Is there balance? There's not enough balance on the ticket. I think that is the concern. Maybe they love Terry Goodin, but they'd like to see maybe a person of color on there from one of our city centers to perhaps balance the ticket. What do you say about that?
Right. Well, as we move forward, Jennifer McCormick is strong. She's a strong lady and a strong woman. And anybody that would question her motives or her thoughts about moving the state of Indiana forward, or her stance on women's rights, or whatever that might be, they need to talk with Jennifer McCormick, because she'll set them straight pretty quickly. And I'm proud to be a part of that. I mean, when she asked me to consider running with her, I mean, let's just be honest. I didn't need the job. I had a job. I'm working. I'm going to my kids' baseball games, and hey, life's pretty good, man. So, but what I did notice is I was traveling around the state of Indiana and going into some areas that were really struggling. I just thought that, Indiana can do better, and it disturbed me. And as an activist, when you get disturbed, if you're an activist, you want to make a difference and you want to make a change. So when she called and talked to me about that, I said, Jennifer, I've got a good situation, but I'm concerned about what's going on in our state, and I want to think about this. And so at the end of the day, it worked out beneficially for me. And I know that she's got confidence in me because knowing how strong she is as a woman, she would never have came to Terry Goodin if she would have had any hesitations whatsoever about where I'm at and where I stand. And, really, if you look at our ticket, Scott, we have got the balance in our ticket. When we raise our hands on the stage Saturday night, you're going to see an African American female. You're going to see two other females, whichever lady wins the attorney general spot. There'll be two females there. So there's going to be, three females on the stage with one male. So we're a pretty good portrait of what Indiana looks like, and our leadership in the Democrat Party is very diverse as well. So, if you look over on that other stage, Mike, Scott, what did you see with Mike Braun? They all look the same, So, so those are the kind of things that the big picture, if you look at that, is if you really dig into, hey, who's going to be better for Indiana? Who's really going to think and be concerned about the issues that I deal with, high milk prices or high gas prices, and let's not forget this, okay? Let's not forget this. Property taxes are the highest they've ever been in the history of Indiana. And you know what? That comes from a one-party rule. The Republican Party has controlled Indiana now for at least 15 consecutive years and controlled the taxing policy. They are the ones responsible for these extremely high property taxes that we're all facing now. It's called mismanagement. It's called they don't know how to run government. It's called we need somebody else in there that knows what they're doing. So that's what Jennifer McCormick and Terry Goodin does, is it provides the opportunity to get folks in there that know what they're doing.
I appreciate it. So, Terry, I'm going to give you a chance just close here. Maybe give us a last statement, especially talk to those folks to my left, even who are maybe concerned, who are just maybe not excited to get out and donate or volunteer or do the things that done to win this election.
Yeah. So as we move forward, I want to say thank you to everybody that has been supportive, and even those folks who have not been. I want to say thank you to those folks who have questioned me. I want to say thank you to those folks who have called me, because that's how you get to know folks. So as we move forward, I think those folks who may just be just a little bit less energetic than others, all they've got to do is look at what's going to happen to Indiana, continue to happen, and it's going to happen on steroids, man. You see Mike Braun's record. You see his record against working families. You see his record against women. You see all that. So if folks are happy and satisfied with what they've been getting, and then what they're going to get that's going to be even worse, taking away their right for birth control, taking away all of that, then, hey, if you can't get excited and say, hey, we've got to change this and we got to put somebody in there that believes the way we do, we've got to put somebody in that office that is on our team. And we're all one big team and one big family. So I think that's going to get people excited enough. And I'm not even going to mention the guy that's running it with his lieutenant governor, because, he's going to speak for himself, and it's just all going to be anti-women, anti-everything that Hoosiers stand firm and believe in. So, hey, pretty simple. You're either cheering for the good guys and good gals, which is the Democrat ticket, or you're cheering for those folks who want to live in the past. So, pretty simple choice, in my opinion, Scott. And as we move forward, I think that will be revealed even more so as the campaign drags on.
Terry Goodin, I appreciate you so much for joining me here on the Who's Lit podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, Scott, thank you much. And I always look forward to coming back. So you can't just have me once, man. You got to have me back, okay?
Anytime.
All right. Thanks, and take care.
Once again, that was Terry Goodin, Dr. Jennifer McCormick's chosen candidate for lieutenant governor. I don't know if I pressed him hard enough for everybody on the left. I'm not a trained journalist. I spent the last 2 days sanding drywall. But hopefully, just letting you hear from Terry at length lets you understand where he's coming from. Now, especially for delegates at the convention, feel free to turn this off. The interview with Goodin should give you about everything you need to know to make an informed choice. However, because I'm the guy with the microphone, I will take the liberty of giving you my thoughts on this race. I am a Hoosier leftist. I am an economic populist and a social progressive. I do not know Bob Kern or Tammy Dixon Tatum, two of the other LG candidates standing in this contest at the convention. I do know Cliff Marsiglia. Cliff is a great guy, and I consider him a friend. His activism in Indianapolis, particularly his work on harm reduction, has saved lives. I will likely vote for him at the convention. However, the fact of the matter is that McCormick Goodin is the likely ticket. I share the concerns of others on the Indiana left that these two candidates may not be able to turn out our base. But I do want to caution my fellow lefties that we shouldn't completely dismiss someone out of hand for lack of ideological purity, especially for votes taken almost 15 years ago. For the broader left to achieve our goals, we need to bring the center along with us. Fortunately, we already agree on most things. Let's not alienate people by shitting on them just because they arrived at the same conclusion later than we did. Lyndon Baines Johnson was a Southern conservative, yet he delivered more progressive change in this country than perhaps any other president in American history. Joe Biden is no leftist's ideal leader, yet he has helmed the most progressive administration of my lifetime, and second place isn't even close. Social issues are vitally important. Support for women's reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, and gun control are literal life and death matters, and I will never turn my back on marginalized communities. But never forget, the economy is always the top issue in any election. Democrats have, far too often over the last 30-plus years, fought only on social issues and have followed Republicans' lead economically. So yes, we need to stand up for women, for the queer community, for common sense gun reform, but we also need to stand up for economically marginalized rural communities. Only doing the former results in empty gestures like kneeling in a kente cloth while allowing the top 1% to continue to make off with all the nation's wealth. So yeah, Terry Goodin was late, very late, to the party on many social issues. But he's consistently fought for the little guy economically. If we're going to question whether he's really a Democrat, I think it's just as fair to ask the "I'm socially liberal but economically conservative" Democrat the exact same thing. Whoever winds up as Dr. McCormick's running mate, this ticket needs the full support of every Hoosier who values democracy, whether they were your first choice or last. I'm inspired by our French comrades this past weekend. Facing the prospect of victory by the far-right National Rally Party, the left and center set aside their differences to form a popular front against fascism and snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. May the prospect of a far-right MAGA Christian nationalist Braun Beckwith administration scare the shit out of the people of Indiana as much as the prospect of Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella taking the reins at Le Palais Bourbon moted the French. Lest my fellow lefties think I've gone soft, let me close here. Dear Lucy, this is the last time I'm running full speed trying to kick that football. Love, Charlie Brown. If this ticket can't change Hoosier hearts and minds, if two white, rural, conservative Democrats can't flip Indiana blue, if running toward the center fails yet again, it's time for wholesale change at Indiana Democratic Party headquarters and for progressives to steer the ship. Thank you for listening. Thanks again to my guest, Terry Goodin. Once again, I kindly ask you to consider a paid subscription at scottarrynrogers.substack.com. A membership over there is the best way to help Who's Left keep growing. But in addition to Substack, you can find me on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at Who's Left, and on most other social media sites at ScottRog78. If you want to send me a message, my DMs are open on social media, or email me at scottrudge78@gmail.com. Forward the show to a friend and have them forward it to another friend. Let's keep this project growing. Until next time, this has been the News Left Podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.